considering the group and pilots are like third graders, basically. I brought a lot of age with me that you can handle, you can look at, you can smell. Just don't write nasty notes in them when you send them back. And this is the, God darn, my head's gotten that big. This is the hat that some clown in Vietnam came up with, this weird blue for our squadron cap. So, and I kept it all these years and it had rotted apart. But I thought I'd bring some things that you might be interested in looking at. Some of the stuff that I snuck out with, you know, those secret documents you're not supposed to have. Everybody might like to look. This is the flight manual for T-38. This is flight manual for an OB-10. And I snuck this one off of a guy down at Ellington one day. He left it sitting in his seat while I was looking at his F4, his checklist for F4 up to E models.
Wow.
That's kind of interesting. And then the checklist for T-38. So if y'all want to kind of pass them around and look at them, it's pretty interesting stuff. Now John, in big airplanes, they didn't have a little flight manual like this. They had a whole library.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Right next to the captain, and a lot of books. So they didn't even carry books home with you, did you? That was just all there. So, and but I was very interested in what John said. I want to proceed in that same light. Where have I been? What's gotten me to here? And what all have I done? And how am I still alive, you know, after doing all this? And that's one question I keep asking myself. So I did bring a couple of other things that we'll hold off on right now. This is an E&E map. This was one of the first things we were issued in Vietnam. It's made out of silk, plastic coated, guaranteed to be rainproof. You could use it for a poncho, but it was mainly to get you back to civilization if you were out there someplace in the jungle. Now the supply sergeant that gave this to the young lieutenant said, "Sir, it's actually good enough to keep small arms fire from hitting, and it will work as a cloak of invisibleness, you know, like they had in."
Yeah. And
I said, "Are you sure about that?" He said, "Sir, bring it right back, and I'll give you a new one if it doesn't work." So y'all may find this interesting. This is basically I-Corps and 2-Corps, which is where I worked most of the time. That's the northern part of Vietnam at the DMZ, down to Da Nang, and then Da Nang down to Chu Lai, with a fake line running across Pleiku all the way to Laos. And it's very detailed. You also carried wadded up in it a $100 bill. That was the only American cash you could have in Vietnam.
Is it
The
still in
pilots
there?
could carry a $100 bill, and that was for bribing local officials or whatever to get you back.
tell them what the fake line was about.
Huh?
Tell them what the fake line was about.
The fake line?
Yeah, you said it had a fake line between Laos and Vietnam.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It was
that's
a-
right. That's fake, all right.
But it was actually really, I'm getting ahead of myself, but it was actually real easy to find that line. That's when you got into 37 and 57 millimeter guns. You could really see them. You knew exactly when you went across the border.
Yeah.
But my history goes back a long ways, and I guess we can just kind of start this stuff around this way. This is a picture of my dad, 1944, standing by his Piper Cub. He was a crop duster.
Wow.
That's J2?
And that's one just almost like yours, except he put 400 pounds of dust in the back.
Wow.
And took right off and went. That was 1944. And he crop dusted. He started flying in the 30s, crop dusted. Then went up to Fort Sill during the war. He was too old to get drafted. He didn't have an education. This is by an interesting airplane. It's a Laird. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of one, but I think this airplane was built by a guy that was trying to compete for the bid for the Stearman. He was coming up with an alternative. They didn't build but 2 or 3 of them. They apparently bought it and were experimenting using it for a duster before they even thought about using Stearman for a duster. For all you home builds, this is a picture of them sitting outside under a tree, working with the tools, getting ready to take an engine off to haul it to town
Refuse it, huh?
and get it redone. And then usually, they work pretty hard. They take off in the spring and go across the south into Florida, finish up with the fruit orchards down there, and then start back. And they'd just go around, find a motel that had a big enough parking lot they could park their airplanes in, and they'd all park their airplanes right by their motel room, and that's the way they flew. And then he spent almost 2 years at Fort Sill as a contract instructor for the University of Oklahoma. And he instructed in PT-19s a little bit, but his main forte, obviously, he had all his time in Piper Cubs. So that's what he did, was to instruct Army Air Corps pilots, primary students in Piper Cubs and Aroncas. But when we got out, obviously, I was born in October of '44, and he was already back on the crop dusting scene at that time. My first flight, not that I remember it, but by story, was they always carried a couple of just regular Cubs with them, and they would use that for ferrying extra pilots, or they needed to go someplace to get parts or stuff like that, or a pilot just needed to go home, and they'd take these. So he had flown my mother to Beaumont, Port Arthur, to have me, and had flown back to pick her up after she went through the ordeal and was kind of recovered. It was 2 weeks. Threw her in the back seat with me in her lap, flew Port Arthur to Missouri in a Piper Cub, and we got back with the group and started working our way around. So my flying career started early. I just don't remember that part. That was all the story. From there, he quit dusting in '46. He had to go start wearing glasses. He was getting a little older, and he said it just was not, he had a family now, and this was not the thing to do. If anything was not perfect, it's too dangerous a job. So he quit, just cold turkey, and went to other jobs and fiddled around, hit this and that and the other. He actually wound up being a professional gambler, believe it or not. In Port Arthur, he had a small gambling club back when it was open to anything that you could do in those days. And about '48, he bought a Stinson Voyager for the family. And he flew the Stinson Voyager just like he flew a Piper Cub. The radio didn't work when he got it. He never fixed it. Didn't worry about it, didn't need a radio. Really didn't worry about the altimeter. He said, you can see the top of the trees. You don't need an altimeter to tell you how low they are. And that's the way we flew. So I got a lot of fun out of flying that way with him. And my mother was deeply in that. She said, I don't want to fly up there. I want to get down here where I can see things. You know, we'd fly down the roads and this and that and the other. And like you said, you've always got a straight road to land on. If you lose an engine, if you're down low, it's no problem. So that's the way I grew up flying. I never really got into, I wasn't old enough to really start pushing for a license. I was probably pretty good at holding a course, dead reckoning and that type of thing. But then he died suddenly in '55 when I was 11. So we lost the airplane, and then flying just kind of went away. After several years in college, this and that and the other, in the '60s, I was really getting interested in the space program. And I really started thinking I'd love to fly, be an astronaut, you know. And the only way you were going to be an astronaut is you had to be an Air Force test pilot school and military fighter pilot. So I started looking at the cadet program at that time, and when '69 rolled around, many of you don't remember this, but you had a little card. It was your draft card deferment, and I think it was 4F if you were in college and making good grades. But when you got within about 3 months of graduating, the registrar sent a note to the draft board that this kid's coming up, he's gonna be ready. So I got, in '69, I got the notice for the pre-physical. And just in watching what had happened in the war, I got to thinking, this is probably not what I really want to do on the ground. I think I'd rather do this a different way. So I went over, got a hold of the Air Force recruiter, and he said, sure. He said, I'll send you up to Shreveport next week. We'll get your physical. You can take all the flight test and everything to see if you qualify. And in 2 weeks, about a month before I graduated, I'd signed with the Air Force and had a scheduled OTS date of July that summer, and then probably flight school sometime in the fall. So we went up to, Karen picked me up at OTS. I pinned on that little bar. My salary immediately went up $200 a month as a second balloon. And we went down to Aransas Pass, brought that new green GTO, '69 GTO, packed it up, and we wound up in Big Spring, Texas. Now, we both grew up in Port Arthur, hadn't been around. We got up that morning at the motel and looked out. You talk about, I mean, there was nothing. There was just a big sand dune up there for us, so it was a surprise. But we had a great time. We flew, we of course flew the T-41, which is on 172, and in those days, the T-41 was part of the at the base program. That'd be at a municipal airport or something like that. But you did that, and then I soloed in the T-37, and in this, you're gonna have to forgive these pictures. The best camera we owned at that time was an Instamatic, if you remember. They don't take great pictures, especially when you try to blow them up. But this was my first T-38 solo. I'm number 2. Back there, they had a little observation area with the wives.
What year was that?
That's 70.
70?
Yeah.
That's at Big Spring too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's way up at Big Spring, isn't it?
Big
That where
Spring.
that was taken?
Oh, those are in Big Spring?
Yeah, this is all Big Spring. But I'm number 2. They had a little observation area that the wives could come out and
Oh, wow.
take pictures, and you'd give them your tail number, and that's where you'd wind up. So I made it through that, made it through the 37, the squeak, the 6,000-pound dog whistle, the most efficient way to turn fuel into sound, all those nicknames that it had, and it was all of those things, all and more.
And then you
But there was only one thing that I really had in my mind by the time I made it to the 37. The 41 was kind of the washout airplane. That's where they really took the first big chunk that weren't going to make it. And that's what it was designed for. We had a little under 100 students in my class, and they split them in half, made 2 classes. So you were always alternating. One class, one half of the class would fly mornings, the other half would fly afternoons. And when I graduated, we graduated 42 out of that 98 plus. So about 50%, and that's what they said. When they brought us in the first day, they gave you the look to your right, look to your left. Both of those guys are going to be gone if you're here, that type of thing. And it turned out that way. I love the T-38. It was the most fun airplane to fly. And when I got to solo, it was, you know, pull that canopy down, feel the pressure come up, and then stroke those burners. And just about the time you got to the end of the 11,000-foot runway, it was doing about 250 knots. Pull the nose up to about 40 degrees, and just climb, just peg that 6,000 foot per minute PVI. But you couldn't carry much in it. It was not a good cross country. It was good for cross country because you could get there fast, but all you could carry was a toothpaste and one pair of underwear. So they didn't want to stay out very long. That's about it. But that's
Flight time.
me with the day before I put my wings on. That's the
Oh
gee
my
whiz
goodness,
picture.
The gee whiz.
can you figure out why they call those lawn darts?
Well,
That's what it looked like.
yeah,
It's
it
a
was
lawn dart.
one of the interesting things about the airplane, and almost every new student did it, is you would get to going down the runway and you took off. The standard was you got to 175 knots, pull the nose up to 5 degrees, nose high on the ADI, and just sit there, and she'd take off when she's ready. And I remember I was waiting, 175, you know, kept climbing. The instructor finally yelled at me, "Pull the nose up, you're going to be the fastest tricycle in the world." But it had a symmetrical wing. You had to put angle of attack if you wanted to do something. Top G's were 7.3, and that was at half fuel. Full fuel, you could only pull about 6.5, but 7.3. You did a loop, 5.5 G's. We flew the G meter in that airplane a lot. You just get it to 500 knots, pull the nose up on a loop, pull it to 5 G's, and just hold 5 G's as long as you could. And that'd give you about a 10,000 foot loop. So it took a lot of space to fly it around. You did a pitch out for a landing. We'd pull somewhere around a little over 2 G's. You just pitched into a 2 G 60-degree turn and kept it at 2 G's all the way around. So that way you'd be close enough to the runway to not land on the next airport over in the other county. So, but anyway, we pinned the wings on, and I had 254 hours at that time. That was basically what you were looking at, 250 to 260 hours to get through the program. And we got to the day that all of the study and all of the grades and everything else really counted. That was the day we walked in after we got our wings, and you picked out what you were going to go to. And it was all done by class standing. They graded everything. Everything was graded, and they boiled it down to a 100-point system at the end of the year. The top 12 guys were within hundreds of 100. Perfect score. I was 8th in the class. The first 4 F4s were all going to Vietnam, and they all went to the first 4 top guys. A couple of 38s went to guys that wanted to stay in 38s as instructors, but they didn't want to go to Vietnam. So they took those, and then got down to me at 8, and the 8 was to OV-10. And it was going to Vietnam, and that's what I wanted to do, and it was an AFAC. So that's what I picked. So from there, I went over to Cannon Air Force Base, and Jim, you'll remember that puppy.
T-Bird.
You bet. And we flew AT-33s to learn about being fighter pilots. And it was basically a program that they had put together to teach the low-time pilots how to bomb, strafe, and all that kind of stuff, and fighter tactics, because the job as an ALO FAC was to call these guys in and put their hair down where you wanted. So that's how we started. Got about 50 hours in that. It was a really fun airplane. I was very fortunate. There weren't many left. And they had worked really hard to group up enough to make this small little training squadron. And it was just a neat airplane. It was really a lot of fun to fly. You never knew what instrument was going to be where and what kind of instrument would be, because there were out of instruments that went with the airplane. So they'd just pull stuff. One day the altimeter would be here, the next day it'd be over here, whatever. You just didn't know. But yeah, it was much like some of our airplanes, I'm sure. But it was a fun airplane to fly. From there, they sent me on to Hurlburt Field in Florida, and I started getting checked out in the OV-10. And that was a fun airplane. I really enjoyed that bird. You could do almost anything with it. And we did. We really did. But, and I didn't really bring a good picture of that airplane. Well, we finished up. I loaded Karen up in the car, drove her to Beaumont, got her an apartment. She had gotten a job to start her first teaching job while I was going to be gone to Vietnam. And then went to Sea Survival in Homestead, which was probably the biggest party I ever went on that was government supported with money. And bobbed around in Biscayne Bay and learned how to kick sharks away and all that kind of stuff. Picked up by a Jolly Green out of the water, and then they put us in the swamp, and we got picked up by a Jolly Green out of the swamp and did all that kind of stuff. Then I zoomed up to Spokane, Washington, went through general survival and POW training, and that was an eye-opener because you knew they weren't going to hurt you, but it still was very realistic. It was just very realistic. Stick you in the little cans without any clothes on, come hose you down at night with fire hoses, get you out. Everybody tried to figure out how do you smuggle a candy bar into this place, you know. And then from there, I shipped out of San Francisco to the Philippines and stopped there for jungle survival. And we went through the old smear again, but based on really replicating Vietnam ideas. And now this was late 71. Things were winding down in Vietnam. Everybody was saying, you're not even going to spend a whole tour there. We were going into the Vietnamization program. And all of a sudden things, just before I got there, really started to heat up. And so I was very lucky. I got there when the war started again. And but we went into, I went into Chu Lai first. And was very fortunate. This is a little map of Vietnam for you guys. But I started out down in Chu Lai. There's Chu Lai. Chu Lai. And our job was with the 101st Airborne. It was the last American troops that were actually doing offensive battling. Everybody else was pulling back, base support and security, that type of thing. And that's what I really want to do, because I was working with American troops on the ground, calling in air support and providing air support. If we couldn't get air support for them, most of my job was to get up in the morning, we'd take off, I'd pick up a bunch of Rangers, 10 slicks, bells, and then with maybe 4 to 6 cobras with them and 4 or 5 loaches. And I just hang back and a little bit above them when we'd go into a point. And they were going to put the stuff in, and my job was to be there, and if they got more stuff than they really thought was going to be there, was to get air support down for them. And but I carried HE rockets, 2 pods of HE rockets, and 2 pods of smoke rockets. So we could offer a little bit of air support. I had 4 miniguns, 2,000 rounds of ammunition, 500 each, and we could get down there low and slow. I mean, I flew formation off of Cobras all the time when the weather was bad. Just get back there and drop the flaps. You could get the OV-10 down to about 80, and cruise, we could get up around 250, 260 with no problem. In Chu Lai, we flew basically a 3-hour mission. The OV-10 had about 1,500 gallons, 1,500 pounds on board, and then we could carry a 230 gallon belly tank, but we didn't use them in Chu Lai. We just kept it a 3-hour mission. So we stayed real busy, real busy. I know a lot of you have seen this picture. I have it on my phone, but this is the one this is when I got my name painted on my own OV-10 in Chu Lai. Little airplane was grossed for $12,000 pounds fully fueled with one pilot, and they had added 307 pounds of metal on the sides and the belly, right under our seats. Kind of beefed them up a little bit. It might stop an AK-47, but it wouldn't stop anything better than that. So with the when we went to the full belly tank, we were flying them about 14,000, 2,000 over gross, so we needed every bit of an 11,000 foot runway to get a STOL aircraft off. But it worked. I was at went out. We did a lot of trips with the Army since we were what they called air liaison officers. We worked directly with them, and we went out to the fire bases with them. What do they need? How can we help? Are we doing the right thing? This is what I can get you. Give little lectures. This is how I'm going to get the air support. You got to tell me if you need some kind of special ordnance or anything like that. But anyway, this one Army guy grabbed me at this. This was LZ Excedrin, west of Da Nang. And he grabbed me and said, "Here, put these two grenades, hold on to these two grenades and I'll take your picture and you look like a real soldier." But everything was winding down. July they finally started pulling the 101st in and went to the no direct offensive activity. And so they shut the Helix Fax down. And they moved me up to Da Nang, and I became a Covey Fac. And our job was the interdiction of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, basically, all the way from North Vietnam to Cambodia. Da Nang picked up everything from Nagia Pass down, and then U-Bon Thailand, or NKP Thailand OV-10s were working the very north part of Laos. And the reason they were doing that is they were already starting to experiment with LGBs, laser-guided bombs. And so they took OV-10s and put the laser spotting equipment in the back seat, put an electronics warfare officer in the back seat. He would set the target and hit the beam on the target, and then the F-4 would come in with the laser-guided bomb and put it in the basket. You know, in 3 or 4 years they'd gotten it where the F-4 could do it all by himself. They didn't even need it, but that was at the very beginning of it. And it was amazing what they could do with a 500-pound bomb with that equipment. You know, from 10,000 feet, the guy would ask you, you know, hey, I've got a truck down there on the road, and he'd say, well, do you want me to hit the bed or do you want me to hit the cab? Which one do you want to hit? And they could literally do it. They really were. But our job was interdiction all the way from North Vietnam of the stuff coming in to South Vietnam supplies. Our nickname was the Laotian Highway Patrol. And our patch, this was the 20th Task Tactical Air Support Squadron out of Da Nang. And our motto was first on target. The motto that we actually used was, we fac 'em, you whack 'em. But if any of you remember back, in 72 was a real surprise. Spring offensive of 1972. About January or so, they started coming in with almost 8 divisions, and we were in the pullback mode, the ship home mode, and everything. And they got SAMs all the way to the DMZ without being seen. So we took off out of Da Nang the first day with 24 missions to look for SAMs, and we only had 20 pilots. So 4 of us actually flew 2 missions that day looking for SAMs. We lost 7 aircraft to SAMs. And it was a bad day. It was a bad day. Most of what we did looked like this on the trail. If you didn't have a specific target, we had what were called IDPs, interdiction points. And you just bombed hills into sand dunes, basically, to keep them from coming through. If you look at this close, you can see at night, they'd come right back through, rebuild the roads, and you'd bomb them out again. The Spectres, the C-130 gunships all took the night missions because they're the ones that had the infrared and all that kind of stuff. You couldn't really fly the OV-10 at night and try to keep the lights low enough. It just glowed on the inside of that bubble canopy, and it's very difficult to fly at night. I did get one good deal. I spent a week on the USS Coral Sea, working with the Navy, and had a great time with them. This is not a good picture, but if you look real close, you can tell it's our wingman. I asked him to, we were going in, I got to get a mission off with the F-4 in the North Vietnam. We did some bomb dropping and did a big cap for about an hour. And that's the wingman was with us. And I asked him to come over and get close because he was flying a fighting wing basically. So he came in and got close. That's not a telephoto lens shot, that's his face right there. So, but it was a lot of fun. And I'm still amazed that they do as well as they do on aircraft carriers. The flight off there was just unbelievable. About 6 to 7 G's transverse in your back, and you took off with one hand on the ejection seat D-ring, and the commander that I flew with said, if you don't black out, pull the card, because we had a dead cat or an engine went out on you, one of the two. But it was super. Vietnam ended for me in Saigon. I was down there on special missions the last 3 months. We were flying air support. All the big air was going up north because they were trying to take Way Phu Bai again and down into Da Nang. So they wrapped up 5 of us facts. We took airplanes and crew chiefs, went to Saigon and started bumming the 17-pound high explosive rockets off of the Army that they carried, so that we could go down and actually provide air support for ARVN, the 44th ARVN down in the Mekong Delta, because they had no American support there. They just didn't have it. So we were flying like real fighters at that time. That was where I did get a DFC for a mission down there, and the last week that we took off, they usually gave you a non-combat week, your last week in there. And this is what they called a Loach. It was a little Hughes helicopter. A friend of mine in the Army flew them, and he called me one day. I said, well, you're not doing anything. Would you like to fly down to Canto? I got to take some mail down to the guys down there. And so I called, I said, I don't have anything doing. Met him over there on the Army side of the base at Saigon, and I crawled up in the side, and he said, watch out for those grenades. And he had a case of grenades in the front seat with us. I said, now why are we carrying those? He said, I'll tell you about it on the way. Don't worry. So what he had is he had these couple of guys that kept shooting at him every time he made this mail run. And the idea was we were going to go by, they had a little bunker built, we were going to go by and shove 4 or 5 grenades down this thing. And they were waiting for us. They just peppered us like crazy. And so that was the only time I got shot down, was in an Army chopper. We flitted across the little bayou and then rolled over upside down in the rice paddy. Of course, he was screaming on guard all the time. You know, I'm hit, we're going in, this is the location. We had Cobras on top of us by the time we got figured out how to get out of the seat belts and everything. And probably 50 kids asking for money and candy out there. It turned out all right, but it was a scary time.
Well, did you still have the case of grenades in there?
Huh?
Did you still have the case of grenades in there?
You know, they weren't there. I don't know where they went. I was probably pitched them when that all happened, but it was funny. So from there, out of an Air Force career of almost a little over 1,500 hours, I got 750 hours of it in 11 and a half months. So it was one of the toughest Air Force training programs I went through. was Vietnam. There was no doubt. We flew, I went from 3-hour missions in July, usually one mission a day. Da Nang, we were flying with a 230-gallon extra tank. That gave us about 7 hours water time. And that gets old sitting in a fighter type aircraft real quick. And we'd spend 6 hours on the trail hunting targets and that type of thing. So, and we did 2 missions a day a lot of times when the offensive started. We'd fly a morning flight, turn right around, fly an afternoon flight. We didn't even get out of the airplane. They refueled it, met us at the end of the runway, refueled it, put in armament, and then hand you a box with a sandwich and an apple in it, and some kind of a canned drink. And you took off again. So I lost one engine on the trail to a 23 millimeter. Went through and took out the prop governor, and when it took the prop governor out, that prop feathered it full bore on a dive, so it just fried the engine, but made it back, no problems. And then I had a belly tank that was probably hit by 23. We never saw I had to trigger the belly tank, but I figured it was the belly tank because it must have blown the nose loose and it shifted around because the airplane just went all out of whack and got uncontrollable, and I couldn't see. So I assumed that's what happened. Hit the trigger and dropped it. We did find some scratches and burn marks on the bottom of the airplane, but that was it. So it was a very lucky year for me. It really was, and I realized how lucky it was. But from there, you know, oh, by the way, if you ever want a little light reading, there's a book that was published. Now this has got the Air Force military slant to whatever it is, but they summed up the 72 invasion, the air war part of it. And this is online, called Air Power in the 1972 Spring Offensive. Talks about all that. I lost a roommate, Bruce Walker, who was the OV-10 pilot that was killed up in the DMZ trying to recover Bat-21. The Bat-21 movie that you see on TV has nothing to do other than the call sign with what really happened. I lost another roommate up there, and he was the only, I think the only fact to win the Medal of Honor posthumously. He put an OV-10 into the drink, which was absolutely a no-no because with those sponsons and stores, it would always flip over. You just could not get it to land flat. But they took a SAM close. He had a Marine artillery observer in the back seat. It blew his chute out, so he could not eject. And this guy went ahead and tried to land it in the waves. He got it in, kept it upright, but it sunk so fast. He went down. The Marine got out. He was able to get loose and get out, but the other guy went down, drowned in the flight, in the aircraft. But from there, gosh, I am getting windy. Came back to the States and started instructing T-38s. The whole idea was get through and to go to test pilot school. I wanted to get that type of high performance experience. But 76 rolled around, we pulled out of Vietnam. All of a sudden, there was just nothing for pilots. And I was one of those 90-day wonders. I didn't have a regular commission. And one of the first things they stopped at that time was they stopped offering regular commissions except academy grads. So without a regular commission, I couldn't advance to major, and it was just time to go ahead and do something else. I was almost 32 years old, and if I was going to go in the civilian world, it was to compete with all of these kids that were 6 years younger than me. So I flew a little bit in the 80s. I went in and got a CFI, had some VA left over, got a CFI up at Addison, and checked out in Debonair and 172, 152, got that online, but it just never developed, and so I didn't get to fly. Moved down here in '89 and was hoping to get back into flying, but by '90 I had developed some blood problems, and in those days a little bit of a sugar issue was a big issue with, so I didn't even try. I figured there's no way I was going to pass the physical at that time. And then all of a sudden you guys came along. And at about the same time I realized they were coming up with LSA, and now they were talking about the private pilot exemption. And things started looking up. And then some guy, big tall guy that we don't see very often anymore, stuffed a little yellow bird up under me and just gave me a really good price. I couldn't pass it up. And I couldn't wait anymore. You know, Deanna and I had flown for a year, just kind of waiting for something to break. And I said, well, things were looking better. They'd come down off of their diabetes issues a little bit with FAA, and the heart issues looked like it'd be workable. So last spring I said, I'm just going to go ahead and go for all and see if I can get a special issuance. And somehow I passed. So that's where I am today. And with flying the little yellow bird, probably in the next month or two I'll be over 1,600 hours total career time. 1,507 in the Air Force in 6 years, 750 in Vietnam in 11 and a half months. So I got all the flying. I understood. I've never understood an airplane like I understood the OV-10. When you're in it that much and every day, when I talk to these guys that flew in World War II or Korea, Jim, and I know you know this, you don't ever fly an airplane that you're not flying out of its envelope, what the designer said it would even do. You know, the OV-10 was supposed to be good for about 6-8 Gs. Hell, I came back with a G meter. You know, you start down on a dive bombing run or a gunnery run or a smoke rocket run, and all of a sudden the world lights up with tracers coming this direction instead of going that direction, and you just snap that sucker real quick. And you got 10 Gs on the darn G meter. But, I mean, it just held together. They were well made. I like the engineer's concept that built that airplane, because he put the suspenders, the belt, and the wire around through the crotch and wrapped around your neck on it. It held together. But anyway, I better quit. I know I'm burning up too much time. If anybody ever wants to, I've got a lot of this on movie. And it's all been digitized and it's on DVD, about 45 minutes of Vietnam, T-38s, and some old flying as well. And I'd be happy to show that sometime if you've got about 45 minutes or so. I think that's about it, really. I can't think of anything else. I think I went through all of my visual aids. Any questions?
Buzz, what base did they send you to when you came back to train? When you got back from Vietnam?
I went back to Reese, which is where I was going to be stationed, and we did just some orientation type work until my class was available at Randolph. That's where I actually went through T-38 instructor school, was Randolph. And so I spent 3 months. I spent about 2 months in Reese before class opened up, and it was really nice because it was just me and other instructors that flew T-38s around, thinking of places to go burn up 3,000 gallons worth of gas in an hour, you know. So it was a great assignment.
Yeah, how'd the OB-10 handle at 80 knots?
You can't,
when it was
you know,
slow.
it was really interesting. I'm sorry I didn't bring a picture of it, but 60%, you could produce 60% of the lift off of the wings just with the prop wash on that airplane.
Really?
They were sharp, and it was all right there in front of the wing, and that's what. And when we were in Saigon, it was really fun. You could bring it back and stall it, pull it to neutral pitch, and I mean, it would literally fall out of the sky, and then you could just catch it, go to full pitch, wide open, and it would just stop falling. And so we loved to do all the 747s and commercial jetliners that were picking up people coming out of Vietnam were always there. So we'd wait until there were 2 or 3 747s, you know, lined up, and then come get right over the apron at 1,500 feet, pull it into neutral pitch, and just literally fall and grab it about 100 feet off the apron. And you just knew it's going to be a ball of flame right here in front of us, guys. And, you know, I don't know what's happened to this captain. But you could do, like the Imovich that guys do, you could do a maneuver that was similar, where you came off of a target, and they always like to butt shoot you.
Okay.
For us, for some reason, they let us go through the pass, and then they'd start grilling you. So you'd start up, and you'd throw one prop in the neutral or reverse pitch, and push the other one full forward, and you could just literally slide backwards like this, and then once you finally caught, start back the other direction.
Start another run.
You know, and it was just an amazing aerobatic aircraft, very aerobatic.
What'd you get your DFC for?
We had, well, we were down, this map here. I had two American Army advisors, and this was when I was in Saigon, and they were down here in what we used to call the Devil's Pitchfork. And we had there were a lot of just strange names that the pilots had made for all of these visual references. We had a place up here on the Mekong River that at about 5,000 feet, the way that it made two quick bends, it looked like boobs, guys. It just, you know, and that was boobs. And then we had the catcher's mitt, and they were just all over the place. But anyway, we weren't getting much air down here, and there was a small NVA unit that had started pounding a bunch of Vietnamese Army with two American advisors with them. They were in a little small fire base, and they were pounding them like crazy, and they were getting up in mortars and stuff like that, some heavy stuff. And the weather was so bad I couldn't get air into them. We had about 600 or 700 foot overcast. The Army was busy. They were off someplace else. So I went down there, and they said, you got to get these guys, you know, the Americans started talking to me. Which was interesting in the OV-10. The hardest thing to master in the OV-10 is we had 5 radios that could be going at one time. We had 2 Fox mics to talk to the Army on the ground. We had a VHF to talk to Army helicopters, had UHF to talk to Navy and Air Force, and then we had a high frequency, the old coffee grinder high frequency. Normally we tune that into Radio Australia and listen to the classical music to bomb by. But you could talk on it if you needed to. So you were busy, and you had that little switch, and you could talk to everybody at once, or you could pick out whichever one you wanted to talk on. And you'd be talking away, and some Army guy would say, hey, Cubby, I'm not F4 such and such, such and such. I'm the guy you're trying to help down here, you know. And then you'd be over to another radio. So it was a real challenge. But these guys were under siege. They had probably 40 or 50 NVA on them, and it was really close. And we were I was working under a 600-foot ceiling, so he asked me to make some passes, and he said, hey, you got them running. They're kind of come out of the woods on the other side, watch. So I went back through, fired multiple HE rockets with the guns blazing right on the deck, because I was trying to stay under the clouds and get down. And turned out that I killed 26 of them. Wow. And pulled them off of that group. So the Army guy down there put me in for the Distinguished Flying Cross. I went back on that day. That was another one of those dumb days that you look back and you think, how did I make it through that? And the crew chief chewed me out because he had to polish the green stains off the prop tips. So, but with those little pop guns, you had to get closer. You just weren't going to do any good. Anything else?
That's cool.
And like I say, if anybody wants to do this sometime, and we'll look at the Vietnam War real close, I'd be happy to. I've got a movie of it. The bad thing about that was you were usually too busy to get the movie camera out and take pictures of yourself, and we didn't have
Selfies.
you know, all that kind of stuff. So, but there are some pretty good pictures, and I got some pictures off the carrier, flying formation with the F4s and stuff like that, which was a lot of fun. And I ate more ice cream that week I was on the Coral Sea than I had in my whole life. It was so good, and you could get it any time. You could walk down in it and just get a half gallon if you wanted to just sit on the deck and eat a half gallon, and it was great. We loaded up. Anything else?
That's cool.
Great.
Is
Is this
I appreciate
video-
your time.
Is this something that you can, can you reproduce it?
Kind of what?
The video, did you say it's a movie or?
Yeah, we can put it on, just on a laptop and hook it to the photography machine.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. It's all been converted over digitally. Yeah. There's actually a picture, probably about 1928, that my dad took, about 6 or 7 seconds, of an old Waco, just, I think, north of Port Arthur, jamming people into it to take them for rides.
Oh, wow.
So that's kind of neat. It's hard to see. It's really a bad film, but you can kind of make it out. So I think it's an interesting, and a little bit of T-38 in there. See what it looks like to roll a T-38 at 720 degrees per second. That's kind of interesting. You always did that with a new student, because you knew that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to fly upside down, and will this bird really go around that fast? And it does. Boy, you just, the way it was set up, the first half stick movement didn't move half of the aileron movement. It moved about a third of the aileron movement. But when you went to that second half, it moved the next 2/3 really fast. And it really will. I mean, just like a car, like you were a bullet coming out of a barrel. You can sit there and just to the sky with it. So, but anyway, I'll let y'all go. I appreciate your time. Finally, the yellow bird, and this is what we wound up with the idea of getting back into flying. I hadn't flown, certainly as a pilot, for 30 years. So this one was a good one to get my time in. Cheap to fly, and it was just a great price. Bought it from Scott Marcotte, who had bought it for his boys to learn to fly in. Deanna took me under her wing, and we started flying and getting checked out, trying to get the hands back, and we were past special issuance physical last spring, and so I've been flying solo. And probably with this, in about another 3 or 4 weeks, I'll be at 1,600 hours total time career.
Wow.
So, it's a great little airplane to fly. It flies kind of like a military airplane. You have to fly it. It doesn't just trim up and fly on its own. And I really have enjoyed it. It's great. You can do really neat rocket passes in it. Roll it up and down you go and all that kind of stuff. So I'm looking forward to more and more, especially good weather.